Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to my lecture on Chapter 6 of the Hoffer text, 7th edition. And Chapter 6 is called Determining System Requirements. So let's start to navigate through the slides a bit. The learning objectives are for you to read yourself. And now we've come to a slide that puts the current topic into context with the overall course. So the authors have come up with a simplified methodology that covers analysis and design for systems. And they refer to it as the systems development life cycle, and that's a classic name for it. And the phases are planning, analysis, design, implementation, and maintenance. And this part is analysis. So the stuff we were talking about before, we were getting oriented, and then we were talking about the planning process. Perhaps not all of it, but enough of it that we know how systems analysts get involved in planning and what some of the issues are. And now we've come upon the main event, analysis itself. And the first part of that is often referred to as requirements determination. Okay, so who has the requirements? Who have the requirements? Well, the stakeholders do. Okay, and what are requirements? Well, I'd like to describe them as an intersection of needs and features. So the people who are going to use the system have needs, and the system has features, and when they intersect well, the features meet the needs so that the users can use the system in order to get their job done in a very pleasing and satisfactory way. So requirements are not features per se or needs per se, but some kind of very interesting intersection of the two. Okay, so the main role of the systems analyst is to work with the stakeholders for the project and to expose and document the requirements. And our authors would like you to start thinking about some of the characteristics of a good systems analyst because, we'd like you to emulate some of those. So here goes. Impertinence. Question everything. So sometimes people who question everything are thought to be rude, and hence the word impertinence is often used as a criticism of those people. But luckily, in systems analysis, this kind of personality trait is helpful because what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to either solve a problem or capitalize on an opportunity. And implicit in that is that the current way of things is not solving the problem or capitalizing on the opportunity. So we need to explore other ways. Okay? How could we do things differently that would solve the problem or capitalize on the opportunity? So we need to question things, and we need to question things beyond maybe everyday polite questioning. Why do you do that? What would happen if we didn't do that? What would happen if we relaxed that constraint? All those kinds of things. So your role as a systems analyst is going to be a bit impertinent, but in a professional and respectful way. Okay? So we don't want to say, well, why in the world would you do that? That's stupid. Okay, we might think it's stupid, but we don't want to share that. Okay, but we might kind of say, well, why? You know, you don't do a certain thing. Have you thought about why? Why don't you do that? Okay, so impertinence is helpful to this job. Impartiality is helpful as well. So consider all issues to find the best organizational solution. Okay, so again, we're doing this because we either have a problem or an opportunity. When confronted with a problem or opportunity, most of us have a gut feel about what the right solution is. We don't. So I just want to say that you're probably not likely to come to a situation and be sort of impartial in this kind of absolute sense, in that you don't have any ideas. On the other hand, the kind of impartiality that we're looking for here is that you're not committed to a particular solution before you hear all the possible solutions. And to hear all the possible solutions, you're going to need to find out what that noise is. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. And for the curious, that noise was some aspect of house cleaning. So we're going to have to convince the people who we're working with, the project stakeholders, and the potential users of a system solution, that we are impartial to the extent that we want to find out about all possible solutions, all points of view, and that we really sincerely feel that way. Okay? Now, that's not to say that you won't have your own ideas. Sometimes that might mean that you don't share your ideas. Okay? Or if you share them as some kind of a footnote or an afterthought. Okay? Because it's this impartiality that is going to open up the playing field, and people are going to feel free to share their ideas with you. And that's the best way to an optimal solution. Okay? Relaxing constraints. Assume anything is possible. This kind of relates to impertinence in a way. What we really need to do with the people who we're trying to help is we need to explore how things would be if they were different. So people who are very good at a particular process in an organization are typically committed to the rules of the game. And they'll do whatever they have to meet the current set of requirements. And so sometimes they're reluctant to say, well, what if we changed the deadline? What if you didn't have to do that in 5 days? What if you could do that in 10? Sometimes they'll say, well, no, we committed to 5. We have to make 5. So there are times when your point of view is going to be to say, yeah, okay, but let's just play a game here. Let's do a thought experiment and let's see what the world would be like if we didn't have that constraint. I'm not saying I can make it go away. Perhaps I can, perhaps I can't. Okay? But let's see how the world would be different, because then we'll know more about the world when we do. Attention to details. Every fact must fit. Okay? Being a systems analyst is a detail-oriented job. Okay? What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify the requirements and design the solution for a business process of some sort. It's full of details. Okay? Some of us are naturally drawn to details, and some of us less so. Well, we'll take the systems analysts as we find them. So for those of you who are naturally drawn to details, well, you found your activity. for those of you who are not naturally drawn to details, here's your opportunity to get better. But attention to detail is very important here. Reframing, challenge yourself to new ways. This kind of links back to both relaxing the constraints and impertinence, okay? I want to talk about one other kind of meeting of reframing that I find helpful in the approach to systems analysis, and that is, what if we took our problem and we pretended that we had a problem that was kind of similar to this, but in some other profession or industry or walk of life? And then how would they solve it? Right? So, for instance, I managed a consulting firm for a long time. And consulting firms, for the most part, if they have employees rather than subcontractors, and that's what we had, they're a lot like hotels and rental car companies. I mean, on one hand, you want to do good work and you want to have a great business. On the other hand, you have to keep your assets producing. So you have to keep your consultants assigned. You have to keep your hotel rooms rented. You have to keep your cars rented. Well, one of the things I would ask myself was, okay, we're a professional service. We're not a hotel. We're not a car rental company. But is there anything that they do in hotels or car rental companies that I might just want to think about? Because some of their problems are similar to ours. And I can't say that I came up with any great insightful thoughts, but it really engendered a lot of creativity. And that's the kind of creative thinking that we'd like to get out of this this word reframing. Okay, deliverables and outcomes from this part of systems analysis. Okay, so what's interesting here is we're going to talk about the deliverables and outcomes before we talk about the activities. So there are certain activities that we do when we're trying to determine or gather the requirements or elicit the requirements. And let's look at what they might be. We might interview people or do observation of people at work. We might review documents that exist in the workplace. We might review data from systems. Okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to produce some kind of output. Okay, so we're going to write, we're going to at least have some notes, or perhaps we'll have some analytical documents. Okay, perhaps we'll create some diagrams or some specifications that we're going to review with people. Now, in the subsequent chapters of the book and the subsequent parts of the course, we're going to talk about things that you can do to document the requirements and structure them towards a proper solution. Okay? At this part, we're saying not so much how to do that, but how do we get to the issues? How do we pull them out of people? How do we find out what the problem is, what the opportunity is? Okay? So here are the traditional methods for determining system requirements. We could interview individuals. We could interview groups. Okay? There's something that's like interviewing, and we do talk about within the chapter, is that we could do surveys. Okay, so that's not typically face-to-face interaction, but it kind of relates to that. Another thing is we can decide to observe workers in the workplace. We can study documents that are in the workplace, and we can also study data that might be inside the system. We're not saying that here, but that's a point I'm going to be making later. So I would say that interviewing individual people is probably thought of as the gold standard of how you gather requirements during systems analysis. It's kind of the thing that we compare everything else to. It's the natural approach. Okay? So we identify the right people that we want to interview, and then we set up the interview in an appropriate way, and then we go and we have the interviews. We're going to be talking about all those parts of the life cycle of the interview in the next couple of slides. So one thing that we're probably going to want to have that you don't naturally think of is we're going to want to have an interview guide. This is a document for developing, planning, and conducting an interview. Okay? Why do we want that? Well, there are really two parts of the interview experience. One, I would say, is kind of an interpersonal relationship building kind of experience. And you can do that regardless of what you talk about. Sometimes it's easier to begin to talk about things that are less work-oriented and more personal-oriented. So you might see a picture on the person's desk of them with some children on a vacation. You say, "Oh, I see a picture of your family on vacation," and then you start to talk about their family and vacation, and maybe some about yours. And the next thing you know, you've kind of bonded. Okay, so there's a part of the experience is having a good kind of a bonding experience together. You can do that no matter what you talk about. Okay, so but unless you remember to ask the questions and get the answers of interest to the problem you're trying to solve or the opportunity you're trying to capitalize on, well then you will have only done a part of the job. Certainly the relating and the bonding is very important, but if you don't get the information you need, then you have not fully succeeded. So we're going to say that having some degree of interview guide is going to help that. So here are the guidelines for effective interviewing. One, plan the interview. Don't just kind of drop by, okay? Prepare the interviewee, have an appointment. Tell them some of the questions that you're going to be asking. Prepare an agenda, a checklist of things that you're going to talk about. Maybe even a list of particular questions. When you're talking to them, listen carefully and take some notes. It's not uncommon to ask to record the interview. Okay, depends on the culture that you're working in, but sometimes it's easier to keep track of the information if you can go back to a tape and play parts of it over again to remind yourself of exactly what was said. Take notes and review them within 48 hours. Be natural. Seek diverse views. All right, so those are all good ideas. So we want to have a good experience. We want to get the answer to our questions. We want to even get answers to questions that we're not thinking about. That's where we're going to seek diverse views. And we want to be business-like. Like for instance, we want to have an appointment. We want to tell them what we're trying to achieve, all that kind of stuff. Here we have an example of a typical interview guide. Okay, and this one's pretty formal. So it's an interview outline. And they're talking about all the purposes of it, the agenda, approximate time, probably even going to have a list of questions, right? This is almost like a script. I'm not saying that you need something this formal. This is probably the high end of how formal and structured it has to be. But you don't want to be winging it. You definitely don't want to be winging it, okay? Because you'll get through and then you'll think of five questions that you forgot to ask. This is what professional interviewers do. They have a plan for the interview. They might not be looking at it the whole time they're doing the interview, but as they get towards the end, for instance, they can look down and use it as a checklist to make sure that nothing has been missed. Choosing interview questions. So each question that is part of your interview it can include both verbal and nonverbal information. And we can ask open-ended questions or closed-ended questions. So I think you probably have an idea what we mean by that. And when we're asking an open-ended question, these are questions that have no pre-specified answers. What kinds of problems do you see in the current system? Really open-ended. Closed-ended questions, questions that ask those responding to choose from among a set of specified responses. Of the solutions that we've talked about, but do you think that that option A would be better, option B, or option C? Classic kind of a closed-ended question. Now, we're not claiming here that one of these is good and the other one is bad. No, au contraire, what we're saying is that some combination of these used in an effective way will get you optimal interview results. Some people think that you ought to begin with open-ended questions because it's easy for people to, it's kind of easy to get them started. Well, sometimes that works, but you'll find sometimes that if you have people who are shy, if you ask them an open-ended question, you'll get a very short answer, right? And you need to ask them more specific close-ended kinds of questions just to get them to open up and get started, because they find them kind of safer. Okay. In terms of the information that you're trying to get, the open-ended questions are more likely to raise things that you've not thought about already, okay? And of course, you'd like to get the benefit of that. The close-ended ones are likely to clear up the details of things that you're already thinking about. And there are all kinds of interview designs. One that's really interesting, people talk about a diamond-shaped design where you begin with close-ended questions, just to get the person kind of started and having kind of easy things to talk about. You move to the middle where you have the most open-ended kinds of questions. And then as you get to the end, you're kind of following up on a lot of things. So you're following up with more closed-ended kinds of questions. So it has kind of a diamond-shaped, closed, open in the middle, closed at the other end. Okay? So what I'm saying for you is that you want to be thinking about these issues with respect to questions, and have on your mind the idea that you need some kind of a mixture of questions to get an optimal result. Here's some guidelines for interviewing. Don't phrase a question in a way that implies a right or wrong answer, because you're going to color the response. Listen very carefully. Type interview notes within 48 hours after the interview. Now, you might think that you're going to remember what happened in the interview forever. And as a person who's done quite a bit of this interviewing, I realized that even 48 hours is a long time. For me, I try to get it done within 24 hours. And what do I do with the notes? Well, the notes are going to be my record of the interview. What I typically do is I take my notes, I try to work them into some kind of outline that reflects the meat of the information that I've gotten from the interviewee. And typically what I will do is to send them a copy of the notes and ask for their comments in case I forgot some things or misinterpreted some things. If you are interviewing quite a few people per week, and I remember when I was doing a management consulting gig, I was interviewing, as many as 3 people a day. So that would be, even 4 people a day. So somewhere between 10 and 20 people a week. It all starts to blur together very quickly. So you really need to, write up your notes and formalize them as soon as you can. Don't set expectations about the new system, about whatever solution we're going to have, unless you know that these will be that you can deliver. And I always like to treat it like this. First of all, if somebody says, are we going to have feature X, then I want to be sure that I understand why they want feature X. So I might say something, well, it sounds like you're asking for feature X. This is something you want? Okay, and why, right? So make sure you understand that. The next thing is, we're not going to know till the end of this systems analysis and design process exactly what the solution is going to look like. And we can admit to that. So you might say, well, I'd like to say that you're going to get what you want. I do know that we're going to give all these requests a fair hearing, but, in the end, we're going to be able to accommodate some requests, and we're not going to be able to accommodate others. And I truly hope that you get what you want. That's probably as far as you want to go. If you promise something to somebody and you don't deliver, your usefulness in this role is going to go way down. And you're just going to bring on a lot of anger that you don't really need to. So long as people feel that you hear what they want and you'd like them to be able to get what they want, that's all they need. Seek a variety of perspectives from the interviews, especially if somebody is telling you something you haven't heard before. Even if this goes against your own beliefs, here's a nice opportunity to find out why they believe that. Okay? Well, why do you believe that? Why is that important? Why do you think that's true? I know that people believe the opposite. Why do you think that the opposite is false? Try to seek understanding. If you have a person in front of you that has a different perspective from you or from the people you've already interviewed, there's real value there, and you need to mine it. Now, where we're going to work to from the individual interviews is we're going to say, well, maybe we don't want to do individual interviews or all individual interviews. We may want to interview some people as in groups. Okay, so why might we want to do that? Are there drawbacks to individual interviews? Well, one of them is that you'll get contradictions and inconsistencies between the interviewees, and you can always confer kind of forward. When you're talking to the person you're talking to now, you can say, well, I've talked to other people who had a different point of view. What do you think about this? And then, of course, they can tell you. But then you can't go backwards without actually going back and having another meeting with the earlier person. So that's always a drawback of individual interviews. You have to go back and have a follow-up discussion with the people you talked to before, and that can consume a lot of time. And kind of a permutation of this is that in later interviews, you uncover questions or issues you never even talked about in the earlier ones. Now, if you're all there together in a group, there's this kind of opportunity to talk about and fully talk out all the issues that come up. Okay, and so those are things that are harder to get from the individual interviews. What if we wanted to interview several key people together? What are the advantages? Well, it's a more effective use of time, yours and theirs. You can hear the agreements and the disagreements at once. And you do get some kind of opportunity for synergies. What one person says will kick off some kind of idea in another person that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Disadvantages. Well, one that we list here is that it's more difficult to schedule than individual interviews because you have to find groups of people all available at the same time. There are some good tools for that now. Calendaring systems and all those kinds of stuff. There's a nice web app called Doodle that allows you to send an inquiry around a group of people and find a common time that you can all be together, and that can be pretty helpful too. So that's a disadvantage. There are other disadvantages not listed here that I think that are important to consider, though. One is that some people will not be forthcoming in front of other people. Okay, sometimes the workers will not be forthcoming in front of the boss, or the boss will not be forthcoming in front of the workers, or the boss will not be forthcoming in front of another boss of another area that they see as a competitor, right? So sometimes the group can have a chilling effect on the participation of some of the members. And of course, that subtracts from the effectiveness of the experience. Now, you can try to moderate the experience in order to have those chilling effects be as minimal as they can be. And you've got to decide whether the disadvantages or the advantages are greater in terms of whether you want to speak to a group or whether you want to speak to individuals. And you can always do a combination. You don't have to do all one or all the other. Now, there are some formal techniques you might want to consider. The first one is called nominal group technique, or NGT. And this is a facilitated process. It supports idea generation by groups. So I think a lot of us have heard a group approach that's called brainstorming. So we get a group of people into a room. We tell them to come with their best ideas. Typically in the beginning of brainstorming, we tell them, okay, I just want you to put the ideas out. We're going to write them all down. I want you to feel free to come up with ideas, as silly as they may sound. We're not going to criticize any. We just want to generate as many ideas as we can. And then, as a second step, we're going to go through and we're going to identify the ones that we like the best, and we're going to work on those. So that's the typical brainstorming, okay? Very popular process. Nominal group technique is a more formal process that the people who promote it feel that it has better potential results than just your basic brainstorming approach. Here's the process. The members come together as a group, but initially they work separately. So we not only tell people to come to the meeting with their best ideas, we typically ask them to write up their best ideas and submit them ahead of time. So each person writes the idea. The facilitator reads the ideas out loud, and they are written on a blackboard or flip chart. We don't always say who the ideas came from. Okay, so we don't have the problem that you have some of the chilling effects that you would get from groups where people don't want to, they don't want to say something because they don't want to have been seen to say it. Well, if we write these down and they're read by the facilitator, then we don't have that problem. The group openly discusses the ideas for clarifications. The ideas are prioritized, combined, selected, and reduced. This can often complement another group approach, which is called a JAD, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay, so if in fact we're doing some kind of interviewing, it could be with individuals or groups, and if we're doing it with groups, we might have one process or the other. An alternative to interviewing is directly observing users. So when we say users, we mean people who would be using our system solution. So watching people do their jobs. Okay? It's used to obtain a first-hand and objective measure of employee interaction with information systems. You have to remember that it can cause people to change their normal operating behavior. There was a time that scientists thought that one could go and observe things in the world in some kind of objective way and not be changing whatever we were trying to observe. It's pretty much universally accepted these days by scientists of all stripes, not only social scientists, that in observing things, we do change them to some extent. So we're going to have to make sure that we consider that. Okay? How could things change? Well, let's say we go and observe a group doing their work activity. They might want to impress us because they might want to all keep their jobs. So they might speed up their work or improve their quality. So we're not going to see what the normal experience is. On the other hand, maybe they think that we're going to take the data that we get and we're going to set some kind of incentive pay standards. And of course, they don't want this to be their best day because then they're going to earn less than they do now for an average day, so they might slow things down. Okay, so when you observe things, you have to be prepared for some of this observational error. And it's very time consuming to do observation. So people do observation, but you have to make sure that number one, that you know what you're going to get when you observe, and that you're willing to pay the price because it can be kind of expensive. Another thing that people do is that they look at the documents that are in in the business. So they may review existing business documents. It can give you a historical and formal view of the system's requirements. And here, if we're talking about documents, we're talking about things like documentation, policy manuals, procedure manuals, those kinds of things, online documentation, online help. Okay, so we can look at what is formally said about the process that's in the business. This does have a value. I'd say that the value is highest when you talk to people and they say, yes, the documentation is very good. It's a real asset. If you talk to people and say, well, the documentation is old. This isn't really how we do things. Well, it might not be a good use of your time, right? So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. It's also true that if it documents the existing approach and we're all pretty dissatisfied with the existing approach, finding out a lot of information about the rules of the existing approach might not generate a lot of value. So the more we think we're going to do something different, the less we want to invest in finding out exactly the little details of what we're currently doing. Okay? There's not going to be quite the payback there. But what kind of things could we find out? Okay, we could find out about problems with the existing system. Perhaps we could look at complaints, bug reports, an opportunity to meet a new need. So we could maybe find out about requirements that people have expressed, organizational direction. Maybe that would come from some kind of a policy or a strategy document. Names of key individuals, perhaps that might come from an organization chart. The values of an organization, perhaps that might come from some kind of an annual report or a policy manual or a strategy document. Special information processing circumstances, that might come from a procedure manual. Reasons for the current system design, that might come from some kind of a summary document from the last system's design. Rules for processing data, again, that might come from some kind of a policy manual. Okay, but before you put a lot of time into them, I think you want to know what your stakeholders generally think of the quality of this information, and also how likely it is to produce information about the approach that you want to take. If it's only a lot of detailed information on an approach that everybody is pretty well fed up with, then perhaps it won't be time well invested. So a potential document is you could have a written work procedure for an individual or work group. It describes how a particular job or task is performed. It includes the data and information used and created in the process. So if this is up to date and used and valued, well, this could be a pretty important document for you. And here's an example of a procedure document. I'll leave that for you to read on your own. Potential problems with those kinds of documents, though. It may involve a duplication of effort. Okay, so you may be getting the same information from your interviews. You may have missing procedures, so it may not be complete. It may be out of date, and it may contradict information obtained through the interviews. Okay, so again, before you put a lot of time and weight into reviewing the documents, you probably want to know what people generally think about the quality of those documents. Um, Along the way, while we're looking at information that's offered to us, we often would like to distinguish between formal systems and informal systems. So formal systems are the official way a system works as described in the organizational documentation. Informal systems, the way in which a system actually works. Okay. Now, this has, I think, a couple of meanings that are important to you as the budding systems analyst. One is this. You want to find out how people really use the system, okay? Not how their boss thinks that they should use the system, not how the original system designer thought that they should use the system, not how other organizations use the system. You really want to know what's currently going on, okay? So sometimes, sometimes you might have formal documentation that says it happens one way, and when you really talk to people in interviews and with observations, you can find out that informally that they do it a whole different way. So that distinction is important. You want to know the way it's actually done. The other thing is that you will find people in organizations who have hijacked a part of the system to meet requirements that the system was not designed to support. And so what will they have done? Well, you'll find that maybe one of the offices has taken a text field. Perhaps we have the classic comments field, and they've decided that they're going to keep information about some process that they want to document. Well, there isn't anything about the comments field. There's nothing about the comments field that says that that's what's actually going on. So by looking at the comments field and by looking at the formal documentation, you're never going to know that there's a significant number of people in the business who are getting support for some of the work that they do from the system in an informal way. Okay, and that's important to know because, for instance, if we replace the system, okay, and we have a new solution that doesn't have one of these renegade comments fields, and in particular, if when we convert the data, we throw away the content that's in the comments fields, we're going to lose a lot of support for things that people are doing within the business. So it's very important to find these kinds of unofficial systems that people have kind of cobbled together within existing system functionality. Useful document a business form. So in terms of a business form, I think we have an example of one here. So here's an invoice. And so what could we do? Well, if we want to know what the company sells, we could get some sample company invoices and see what they sell. What's on a typical invoice for us? Okay. That's one way to find these things out. So you can actually look at the inputs to current systems or the outputs from the current systems and get a pretty good idea about the functionality that's being supported by the current systems. So some of those could be forms, some of those could be reports, some of those could be screens, some of those could be dialogues that run on some kind of either screen or handheld or something like that. Okay. What other approaches could we have to determining requirements? Well, there's been an approach, it's been hanging around since the 70s, so that's quite a while, that's 40 years, invented by IBM called Joint Application Design. And it's a group process. It brings it together key users, managers, and systems analysts. The purpose is to collect system requirements simultaneously from key people. It's typically conducted off-site with the idea that people won't be interrupted. Typically, it takes a day or more. And the idea is that instead of pursuing all of the players individually and trying to get time from them and trying to balance their ideas, we're going to invite all the players to have a common experience in which we're going to be able to come to consensus on what the requirements are in some kind of accelerated way. There's a lot of organizations who do this. There's a lot of organizations who do this well. It does suffer from the potential problems that we always have in groups, that the dynamics can be chilling. On the other hand, it does have the benefits that we get from group processes, that there's a kind of a synergy from a group process, and there's also kind of a good aspect that you get everybody there, you get all the ideas, and you have kind of a finality to it. So JADs are alive and well, and still going on. You could take a lot of different approaches with the JAD. The key JADness of JAD is this kind of collection of all the interested parties in some kind of an all-day or multi-day off-site common experience. Group support systems. I'm not going to talk about that. That's kind of an aging idea. Case tools. Now, case tools are just systems to support systems analysis and design. And that's pretty much what we expect to have these days. So I'm not going to talk about those a whole lot. System prototypes. Prototypes are still playing a pretty good role in the systems analysis and design process. People do like to prototype things. There's really two kinds of prototyping. There's what I would call throwaway prototyping. That's where we build a prototype, typically of the user interface, with the idea that it's going to help us to identify the requirements. And the idea that when we're done, we're going to use the prototype as an embodiment of the requirements. And but that when we really develop the system, we're not going to use that software, because it's kind of like we built it out of plaster of Paris. We used some very quick, non-production worthy tools to build it. Okay. A potential problem with prototypes is that people will say, okay, let's turn it on. And of course, it's been built with phony baloney parts, so you can't simply turn it on. A good thing about prototypes and where they're particularly good is when we want to test out new ways of users interacting with systems. Creating prototypes and trying them out is sort of an experimental approach to gathering the requirements. The other kind of prototyping that people do are in agile system development. The idea that we're going to develop the real applications, we're going to write the real software in these kind of sprint increments. And so we're going to see the real application software evolve over time. It has some of the prototyping point of view. It's maybe not so experimental, although it can have an experimental feel. Um, we are typically building the product with real tools, production worthy tools, so it probably doesn't happen quite so fast. But this kind of idea that we kind of incrementally experience the product and that people have the opportunity to steer the result as we go from sprint to sprint to sprint um, is a very important part of the agile approach, and it definitely has um, a lot of aspects that are akin to prototyping. I talked a little bit about the JAD before. So the JAD is an intensive group-oriented requirements determination technique. The team members meet in isolation for an extended period of time, at least a day, sometimes several days, typically off-site. Highly focused. It's resource intensive because we have a lot of people there. It was started by IBM in the 1970s. Um, Here's a picture of a JAD room. So we have kind of everybody there. You'll see we have a laptop, we have name tents, we've got boards. Um, what we're really trying to do is to show a highly facilitated, highly interactive kind of requirements gathering and design exploration process. So here on slide 33, we have a list of the roles that people can play in a JAD. So session leader, users, managers, sponsors, systems analysts, scribe, people from the IT staff. Okay, so those are the kind of people who are going to come to a JAD. The end result, documentation detailing the existing system and the features of the proposed system. Case tools, again, case tools are simply the tools of systems analysis. So over the course of our systems analysis work, we're going to do a lot of diagramming. Those kinds of diagramming tools are case tools. Sometimes people will use prototyping during a JAD or during really any other kind of a requirements gathering process. Most of us feel that prototyping generates the most benefits when we're trying to come up with a solution in which the users interact with the solution in a new way. To the extent that everybody understands how you interact with one of these solutions, well, we don't have to go at it in such an experimental way. To the extent that we have a different approach, the experimental aspects of a prototyping approach can really drive a lot of benefits. And here is a diagram about how you might take a prototyping approach. And I'm just going to leave that there for your reading pleasure. I've already said what's on this slide. Okay, I've talked about the benefits of a prototyping approach and not the drawbacks. So to the extent that you're doing prototyping instead of creating documentation, if the prototype isn't going to be the system itself, you might find that the prototype is kind of vague about the way certain features should work because it's not a fully developed prototype. So you can have those kinds of problems. Um, I mentioned that what we're doing in systems analysis is we're trying to solve a problem or we're trying to capitalize on an opportunity. And there was a point of view in this problem solving kind of approach that came along, I'd say, in the late 1980s through the 90s, and it was called business process reengineering. And there's still people who talk about it. They call it BPR for short. Uh, and here's the idea: you have a business, even if it's not a for-profit thing. You have a business, and you have all these activities that you do, and you just got a bunch of processes that are going on. And in some of these, of course, you're doing them in a kind of an optimal way, and in some of these, you're probably not. Maybe you just haven't put the effort into them, or you've never really thought about it. So the idea of business process reengineering is this idea that you could go and examine your process, and you could kind of optimize it, right? Um, Big time business process reengineering kind of said that this was true on an even bigger scale, that you could look at all the processes in your business at the same time and, of course, balance them off against each other and come up with a really big kind of optimal design. Well, uh, the business process reengineering approach has been helpful to some and destructive for others. It's been helpful to people who have tried to look at limited areas of their business and tried to come up with more optimal approaches and solutions. For people who try to redesign their whole business, there have been a few interesting success stories and many stories of organizations that have attempted this and just really bogged down and lost their momentum, spent a lot of time, spent a lot of money, create a lot of frustration. So the way I'd like you to think about business process reengineering is on a smaller scale. And it's just a kind of another way of expressing this idea that we have some problem or opportunity that we'd like to either solve or capitalize on in the processes that we're doing within the business. And to the extent that we do that, to the extent that we come up with the requirements and the design of the solution, well, then that re-engineers our approach to the business. Um, I don't want to talk about these too much. Okay, so the business process reengineering folks, the people who got us kind of thinking that way, they do have a phrase that's pretty cool, and it's this phrase of we'd like to entertain disruptive technologies. What do we mean by disruptive? Well, we mean disruptive in the positive kind of sense. Everybody in our business, they do something the same way. And we're going to decide to do it a different way. It's going to change things dramatically, but all of a sudden, we're going to have savings, we're going to have higher quality, we're going to have higher productivity, we're going to get something, we're going to have a breakthrough. And one of the technologies that my former consulting company had a lot of experience with that had this disruptive kind of quality to it was document imaging. So we would go into a business like let's say insurance claims, where people, for the most part, were handling claims on paper. And so the claim would come into the company. Perhaps it might come in by fax, but it would be turned into paper. And then the claim would be put into a folder. And then the folder would kind of make its way from desk to desk and job to job in order to get through uh, its workflow, right? Well, sometimes it might take 90 days to pay a claim. Well, customers don't like that, and people were trying to shorten up the claims um, processing process. So one of the technologies, well, actually two, that were very disruptive in a positive sense to claims processing were um, document imaging and automated workflow. So what we would do is we would take all the documents that came in related to a claim, and those could have been forms that people filled out about some kind of accident or illness, and they could have been photos of cars, or they could be X-rays of joints and bones and that kind of stuff. Okay, so we would capture that stuff electronically, and we would put it in some sort of electronic document store. Okay, so that meant this once they got into an electronic document store, they could be used by more than one person at the same time. And so we didn't have to wait for a packet of paper to go from desk to desk to desk if three different people could use it for three different parts of the process at the same time. Well, then that was going to be possible to do because the document was now electronic. And to optimize that, we created these electronic workflow systems that would take something like a claim and have it go through all the workflow parts of the process. And so things that historically could only be done in series, do A and then B and then C, some of those things could be done in parallel. We could do A, B, and C at the same time. And we could go into a work area and take a claims process that took, say, on average, 45 days, and we could maybe get that average down to 30 days or 20 days. And we could do it with those disruptive, in a positive sense, technologies. So one of these things is that when we're looking at for opportunities in our business life, we might want to look for technologies that have that kind of positive disruptive element to them and say, is there a disruptive technology that we can bring to the business and get some kind of a big productivity or quality boost that we didn't have before? And here's a list of disruptive technology opportunities, which I will leave for you to read on your own. Okay, it wouldn't be a good discussion of requirements determination if we didn't talk about Agile. Okay, so let's talk about the key differences between the historical kind of waterfall approach to requirements analysis and gathering and the Agile approach. In the traditional approach, we have this idea that we can gather all the requirements up front in detail. And it's only after we've gathered all of them and we've documented all of them that we're going to begin to build the solution. Okay? Whereas in an Agile approach, what we're going to do is we're going to put some effort up front into identifying the requirements. Okay, so typically Agile people will write they'll write one of the documents that they'll have will be a vision statement for the system. And then they'll begin to identify user stories, which describe the functionality that the system is going to support. But what they don't do is they don't have this idea that we're going to sift through every user story and definitely say we're committed to this one, we're not committed to that one. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put them on this list we call a backlog. All right, and we have the feeling that during the project we're going to accomplish a respectable amount of the identified user stories that we find at the beginning of the project, but we're not committed to doing all of them, and we're not committed to which ones. We're going to commit to them progressively through the project. As we come to each new sprint or iteration, we're going to pick the most important things that we can find with the product owner in the backlog, and we're going to commit to that. So when we blow the whistle at the end, we'll know that we picked the most important stuff, right? So, yeah, we do some planning up front and some requirements elicitation and interviewing and things up front in both cases. But in the more traditional kind of waterfall approach, we have this idea that before we put a keystroke to electronic paper, before we write line of code 1, we'll have fully detailed all the requirements, and we'll have committed to some and ruled out others. And we're not claiming quite so much in the agile approach. Okay, we'll have identified a lot of user stories. We'll have clarified them to some extent. We'll get them on the backlog. We'll prioritize them, and then we're going to get started. So a lot of things that the Agile people like to talk about are on the slide here. Continual user involvement. They like the idea that we're going to have the users and the person of the business owner involved in the project all the way along. I want to point out that there really wasn't anything about the waterfall approach that said that you had to kick the users out after you did the initial planning. Some of the best teams kept the users involved the whole time, which is how the Agile people discovered that worked. Okay, so continual user involvement is consistent with Agile, but they didn't invent it. Agile user-centered design, it focuses on goals, roles, and tasks. Okay, so the Agile people talk about user stories, which are kind of lightweight expressions of how the users are going to use the system to get their job done. The more waterfall oriented people are going to be using the version that we're going to be learning within our class, which are called use cases, which are kind of what I would call heavyweight user stories. So they are scenarios that describe how the users are going to use our system to get their job done. Kind of about the same thing. Okay, so Agile is focusing on user-centered design. The best of the waterfall folks are focusing on user-centered design as well. The planning game based on extreme programming, exploration, steering, and commitment. I want to talk less about the planning game than I just want to go back to. In a waterfall kind of approach, we have this idea that we're going to document the requirements pretty thoroughly up front, and we're going to make a decision about what's in scope and what's out of scope up front. Okay, so we're going to trade everything out before we start to build, right? Whereas in the agile sort of approach, we're going to get a lot of the requirements out. We're going to identify a lot of user stories. We're going to start to prioritize them. We're going to put them into the backlog, but we're going to allow them to continue to fight amongst themselves over the life of the project. At any given time, the most important ones in the current perception are going to get worked on the next sprint. And at the end of the project, when we blow the whistle, we have this idea that there'll be some user stories, there'll be some requirements that just didn't make the cut. Not because they were bad, but the things that they didn't get done before the whistle blew. It's like a game of musical chairs, right? I talked enough about continual user involvement. Everybody believes in it, so we're not going to make a big deal of it. I talked about agile user-centered design. Not going to talk about that more. The planning game, not so much of an issue for me, so I'm not going to have it be a big issue for you. Oh, and the last thing we have here, we have a couple slides on determining the requirements for one of the cases that's used in the book, Pine Valley Furniture's web store. And then we've got the summary. So I said in the beginning that I would come back and talk about the big picture in the end. And here I'll put a minute or two into it. We should see ourselves as systems analysts. We should see ourselves as consultants, right? We're going to help people solve their problems and capitalize on opportunities. Generally speaking, people are going to work with us on kind of everyday aspects of their business. If they want to completely transform their business, they'll probably find some kind of management consulting firm and pay them a fortune to come in and tell them what their business should be doing, how they want to re-engineer their business. That's not really what we're learning in this course. What we're learning is for organizations who want to do something different, okay, in a practical way, we're going to help them do that, right? So we're going to help them focus on their problems and their opportunities, and we're going to look at their needs. We're going to try to pull all that out. We're also going to want to talk about features. So what are the features of existing systems and how do they meet their current needs? How are their future needs going to be different than the current ones? How could a future system meet those needs? Again, requirements are this intersection of needs and features. And we're going to get all that information out in some way, individual interviews, group interviews. We could do that. We could do it with surveys, all kinds of ways that we could do it. We could do it through a JAD. We're going to do it however we're going to do it. And then we are going to find some way to document our understanding of the requirements and the design of the solution. So this chapter has been about pulling everything out and communicating with people. As we move on to chapter 7 and beyond, we're going to be talking about how exactly we can document things and check back with the stakeholders to make sure that we really understand each other. And we're going to move on to that after this. Meantime, I'll say bye until next time. Bye-bye.